Hi there, this is Sage Queen from GameTourist.com, and this is the 8th and final part of my Adept Guide for Mass Effect 2. This video, as promised, is a playbook of sorts. I've mentioned I play my Bastion Barrier Adept as a quarterback from American football, who uses powerful plays together with her teammates to turn the battlefield into a Shepard kill zone. Now, I try and keep my style of play pretty flexible. I have in mind general plays that I would like to use with the squad mates that I have with me, but I tend to base my plays off of the enemy type that I'm facing. So let's start by talking about the different types of enemies and what plays work particularly well against them. The four main types are going to be mercs or mercenaries, synthetics, collectors, and the occasional boss mob. Within the mercs, there are three main groups: the Blue Suns, the Eclipse, and the Blood Pack. If you run the Archangel recruitment mission, you'll get an introduction to all of them. The Blue Suns primarily are shielded enemies. Occasionally they'll have armored mechs with them, or robots, in their ranks. The Blood Pack are armored Krogan and Vorcha. You'll rarely see a shield or biotic barrier on them, but be warned, they like to flank you and they regenerate very quickly, even if you get them down to their base health. The Eclipse are similar to the Blue Suns in that they have shielded troopers and armored mechs, but they're a little different because they also have vanguards with barriers, and those guys like to flank you, so they're kind of a mix. Now, Adept Shepard's Warp will take care of barriers and armor. She can also take down shields with her fast-fire weapon, so she is perfectly capable of getting enemy protections off all by herself. But since Adept Shepard's skills of Singularity, Throw, Pull, etc. are so powerful, it's sort of a waste to use her as the protection popper offer. It's better to get your squad mates to act as can openers getting through protections, and you do the fireworks stuff after. As for me, my favorite two can openers are Garrus and Miranda. Miranda's warp takes on barriers and armor, and her overload takes out shields, so she's really kind of a Swiss Army knife kind of girl in that she can adapt her opener skills to any situation. Garrus is a little bit more of a roleplay choice for me. He and Kaidan are my wingmen in Mass Effect 1, but that second overload is very helpful against mercs, who have a lot of shields, and Shepard doesn't have much to take care of shields. He's also got concussive shot. In addition to knocking enemies off their feet and making combos with that, it will also take down barriers, and he gets armor-piercing ammo, so he's a very nice squad mate to have around as well. Sometimes for the fun of it, I'll sub out Kasumi for that second overload, but I don't find that her Shadow Strike is quite as quick as I would like. So generally speaking, for me, it's Miranda and Garrus. And with Miranda and Garrus to pop off protections for me as can openers, I'm then able to move on to other plays. One of my favorites is what I like to call the OS hit combination. That's a combination where you use an overload or some sort of protection popping technique, a singularity, and then some kind of strong hit. One of the cleanest and neatest ways of doing this is have Garrus do the overload, Shepard do the singularity, and then have Miranda kill that mob caught in the singularity with a warp. Now, obviously, there are many variations here. If Garrus is busy doing the overload, Miranda can take on the overload, Shepard can use the singularity, and Shepard can also throw out her own warp. Garrus's concussive shot can also be used in place of warp, though it doesn't, I find, do quite as much damage as warp does. And while I named this with overload in mind, simply because you mostly see shields on mercs, you also see armor and barriers too, and that's where Shepard and Miranda's warp come in handy. The key characteristic of the OS hit combination is that you're going after a single target, using 3 skills to make 1 kill. Now, that may seem a little bit like overkill to take 3 skills to take down 1 merc, but on the higher difficulties, every target that is shooting is 1 more target that can be shooting at you. You really want to take down people quickly, efficiently, and as fast as you can when you're being surrounded by merc groups. Of course, if 1 mob flying around is good, then 2's got to be better, right? So we can go for the double OS hit. That's going to be double protections coming off, a singularity, and then the hit. Sometimes it's best to have Shepard lay down a singularity first. Mobs are less likely to run from a singularity if they think they still have their shielding on. Then you can capture multiple mobs in a singularity, pop off their protections, and send them flying together. Of course, if you can get 2, why stop there? If you can get 3 or 4 or more, maybe not all at the same time, then you're on a marathon roll. Marathon singularity is utilizing either 1 singularity or a single point on the battlefield to try and continually stop up mobs in 1 choke point place. I personally like to watch where mobs are congregating, places where enemies like to find cover or where they think they have a clear view of me and my team. Then I slap a singularity down on that spot, pop off those enemy protections, send them flying, and finish them off with bullets. Then sort of dares the other enemies to try and use that same spot again. I also really like alternating between the aggressive OS hit singularity and the long-running marathon singularity. The OS hit singularity makes for a nice opener when you've got all your squaddy skills charged, and typically you want to take out the mercenary who's closest to you. But once that's done, it's nice to settle into a marathon singularity, since you'll by now see where the targets are congregating on the battlefield. And by and large, mercenary groups tend to stay back in cover simply shooting at you, so singularity is a terrific tactic for dragging them up above cover where you can freely shoot at them. When you start dealing with flanking enemies, however, and they do show up within merc groups, the tactics change a little bit. I don't like enemies getting within point-blank range of my Shepherd, so I try to find a good spot and cover to begin with, and as the enemies close in, I do a 3-skill smackdown. I open up the menu, see what Shepherd's got in her back pocket, and throw anything and everything that's applicable at that charging mob. Now, 1 or 2 charging mobs is one thing. You take care of it and you go back to your typical mercenary tactics, but continually charging mercenaries, mechs, the blood pack, and so on are going to require more aggressive tactics than O's hit. At this point in time, it's good to look to your terrain. Do you have ledges or cliffs that you can knock enemies off of? This is where throw and pull really come into play. Also concussive shot. Warp can be nice too because it will momentarily stun an enemy and then you can shoot at them. This is also time to start using Singularity even on protected mobs to tie them up and keep them from charging you. The key here is to give yourself plenty of room to take down the enemy before they reach you, so if they start charging you, you may also consider finding a new spot in cover. This is part of why I use Barrier. One final note, whatever difficulty you're playing on and whichever squaddies you choose to bring with you, I would highly recommend turning off the squaddie powers. In doing this, you raise the squaddies from mere AI running around behind Shepherd to, in a sense, giving Shepherd your squad mates powers for the duration of a mission. Since Adept Shepherd's powers, particularly Singularity, are most useful when used in conjunction with these other powers as I've been outlining, it's really an excellent idea on any difficulty to turn off the squad mate's AI, if you haven't done so already. Now, I began with the mercs because you see them most often in game, and also because their AI seems to be somewhat copied by the other enemy types of synthetics and collectors. When it comes to synthetics, they act a lot like mercenaries do. The Geth act a lot like troopers do, and the mechs act a lot like the blood pack do. In other words, the Geth tend to stay in cover and shoot at you, whereas the mechs tend to try and flank you. So all of the tactics that I outlined for mercenaries will also apply to synthetics with the addition of a few more. Number 1, their base health is weak to overload, so that's yet another reason to bring along someone who's got overload. That use of overload means that Miranda and Garrus are still a good choice to bring along with you, but it's Tali who really shines against synthetics. Her combat drone is useful, energy drain will also help against shields, but it's that AI hacking that will turn the enemies against each other and get them to fight each other for you. That won't work on organic targets, so I rarely bring Tali on main missions, but when it comes to the Geth, she is the gal to bring. Now when it comes to collectors and also the husks that are in among them, your tactics are going to be similar to mercenaries, but there are also going to be a few additions here. Collectors are going to largely act like mercenary troopers in terms of their AI. They have barriers instead of shields. They also come in much larger numbers than mercenaries do. Husks are going to act like extremely aggressive blood pack or extremely aggressive mechs in that they're armored and they will come rushing at you in huge numbers trying to melee you as much as possible. Their tactics are a little tricky. Then there's Harbinger, who is somewhat a collector and mostly a boss. He's also mostly just very annoying. The best squaddie for dealing with the collectors and the husks, in my opinion, is Samara. Fully leveled, her Reeve does more damage against barriers and armor and health than Warp does, so she's a great ally here for busting through protections and doing damage against that base health. I also find that her throw and pull together are slightly redundant, so I usually just give her throw and focus on maxing her Reeve skill and her biotic mastery. Thane can also be very helpful here with his warp and his throw. Shredder ammo is sort of meh in my experience. But sadly, you get Samara and Thane fairly late in the game, so you can't access their help on the Collector ship or on the Horizon mission. But still, once you have them, they're very useful. Before then, Miranda is a good choice for dealing with the Collectors. Her overload is useless against them, but she can still spam warp on them. Grunt and Jacob will both give you incendiary ammo, which can help against the armor, and Grunt has a very high survivability rate, too. Jack can bring warp ammo, and she does have her skills, but I often found she died a lot. Now, when it comes to those pesky husks, remember, simply getting their feet off the ground will instantly kill them, but I found that even more than throw or pull, what's best is that warp sings. That is, warp, or Reeve, plus singularity will kill batches of husks simply by pulling them all into a singularity at the same time and making them insta-die. For example, right here in the Derelict Reaper, I have Samara and Thane use Warp and Reeve to bust protections off the husks. I keep their throws ready just in case, but mostly I'm having Shepherd throw out singularities as we retreat down the deck, drawing the husks after us. The unprotected husks then get sucked into those singularities and insta-die. The protected ones are stopped up as if behind a cork. When the husks break free, the protected ones, I just toss out another Singularity to stop them up again and have Thane and Samara continue to pop off those protections. We can also shoot down the protections as well. Occasionally we need to use a throw to take out stragglers who bust through, and occasionally I do need a barrier to get myself out of a bad situation. But generally speaking, this works really well for husks in places where you have some winding corridors to work with. Where you don't have corridors, things get a little messy when you're dealing with being stuck under a certain bubble, for example, or in a particular room. In those situations, you just want to keep moving, and in those cases, it's pop those protections off, and it's terrain park time. Scions added an additional challenge to the mix. You want to try and hide behind cover with them, but you just really shouldn't, especially when there's husks around. I just strafe to avoid them. Thankfully, Scions are pretty slow, and if you keep aware of them, you can usually dodge their shockwaves. With Scions, I typically try to take out the husks first so that I can focus on them next. Once I've got them alone, I use the 3-skill smackdown, basically toss all my good stuff at them, and then I just keep it coming. Whatever bullets, whatever skills I've got, I throw it at them. I call this the kitchen sink approach, as in throwing everything and the kitchen sink. It's a very good way to deal with very, very high hit point mobs when you've got the time to focus on just them. Now, in going back to the collectors, again, they act a lot like mercenaries, other than the fact that they use barriers and tend to come in very close-knit groups. The real challenge with them is Harbinger, who is constantly taking over the one with the lowest health points, and then becoming an entity of pure barriers and armor. It makes it very difficult to take on the collectors with typical merc tactics. I'd love to be able to simply send Singularities out, suck collectors up above cover, and then shoot them down like I do mercs. But because Harbinger is constantly flanking you with so much barriers and shield, it really means that I end up using a kitchen sink approach to him most of the time, trying to make sure that he is dead before he actually reaches Shepard. Then I look around the battlefield and try and take down the mob that's got the lowest health as quickly as possible before Harbinger manages to take that one over. Now, when it comes to bosses, they're all really different, and there's no one approach to all of them. Marathon Singularity can pin a boss mob for a while, but they usually bust free pretty particularly. Truly, I end up using a lot of kitchen sink moves with true bosses. I just end up throwing everything I have at them and putting out as much ammo and warp as I can. Keep in mind, though, that bosses are exactly what heavy weapons are for. A lot of bosses have regenerating shields or barriers, like the Praetorians and certain gunships, but their armor will rarely regenerate. I usually use Overload or Warp to take down the outer barrier or shielding, and then use the heavy ammo on the armor underneath. I personally really love the Arc Projector and the Avalanche for those situations. Of course, what's a boss to one person may not be a boss to another, and sometimes a mob that's just annoying to one person, like a heavy mech, is completely deadly to another person. In these situations, I basically say you want to keep an eye on how many other people there are in the room, and also your terrain. Bosses will often try and pin you in rooms where there's not a whole lot of cover, or there are weird places to maneuver around. I personally try to get my barriers up, make sure I'm in a good place to fire on the boss when they happen to be at their weakest. Lastly, I try to maintain a really flexible approach to play. When I get flustered, I just go ahead and use the pause key, left shift for the PC, to give myself a moment to think and to breathe. Much of the time I set up Shepard's skills on the quick keys, but I also set up my 2 favorite squatty powers on the quick keys also. That will give me a chance to see when their powers have recharged, even if I don't use those powers particularly. Alright, so that's a really quick overview of my favorite combos. If you want a mission-by-mission guide to the game, there are several out there on the internet. I find, however, that as long as I have an adept build that I know and I like, I can rely on my squatties, and I know a couple of plays to work well with those squatties, that I can probably manage my way through whatever's in the game or whatever new DLC happens to come down the pipe. I hope these guides have been inspiring to you and have encouraged you to perhaps try out your own adept. From Game Tourist, this is Sage Queen. Best of luck with your adept, and very happy hunting.